Before we dive in, I'm honored to introduce today's incredible guest, Dr. Diana Hoppe, a board-certified OBGYN and women's health advocate with over 30 years of clinical experience. Dr. Hoppe is the founder of Amazing Over 40, a telemedicine platform focused on hormone balance and women's wellness. She's also a sought-after speaker, media contributor, and author of the book Healthy Sex Drive, Healthy You, where she explores the vital link between libido and overall health. Dr. Hoppe has been featured in Vogue, Women's Health, and even on The Dr. Oz Show, and she currently serves as the medical director for several elite medical spas. Her passion for helping women navigate perimenopause and menopause comes from both her medical expertise and her own personal health journey, including overcoming stage 1 breast cancer. Today, she's here to talk with us about the intersection of hormones, relationships, and how HRT might just save your marriage. And who knows, maybe you'll never darken my door for a divorce. Please help me welcome Dr. Hoppe. Well, Dr. Diana Hoppe, welcome to the Splitting Smart podcast. So great to have you here.
Thank you for having me. This is fun. Thank you.
It really is. Well, today, as we're talking about this topic of hormones and the impact on relationships and particularly marriages, I'm really glad to have you here because this is an area where, quite frankly, in the divorce law world, we hear people tell us all the reasons why their relationships have failed, why the marriages aren't working. But I have to tell you, I've been doing this for 35 years, and I haven't once had anybody say, I think the hormones are off, or we've gone to the doctor to figure out what's going on. All the symptoms have been described, but I think this is something that's really overlooked. So let's jump right into it and start with the science behind hormones and marriage. So let's go with the basics. Can you share with the listening audience, Diana, how do hormones, particularly in women over 40, how do those impact their emotions, their energy levels, and even how we perceive our own relationships?
It's a great question. And hormones are huge, really. When we think about the impact of hormones on our health, our well-being, our mental status, they're huge. And I think to make it somewhat more understandable, because I really don't think we get taught about what's happening during our menstrual cycle and what's happening with our hormones, I wanted to share a slide with you that we can talk about that's going to make it much easier to understand what happens during a normal menstrual cycle for a woman. And then what happens as she gets in her 40s and 50s, which is when perimenopause and menopause start really causing havoc on our hormones. On the left, you can see menstrual cycle and has a 28-day cycle. So like day 1 to 28 is the normal duration of the menstrual cycle. Now, when we talk about the period, that's normally like when you're bleeding, that's like day 1 to 5 to maybe day 7. What you can see here in the pink line is estrogen is really peaking around day 12 to 13. And then you see testosterone, that's in the tangerine line, that also peaking mid-cycle. And then progesterone is peaking now at, we call it the luteal phase, which is about day 21. So our hormones are fluctuating. And so this is showing how there's definitely changes in hormones during the month. Okay. So this in itself, I think, is somewhat eye-opening because a lot of women don't know what's happening during the month with their hormones. During mid-cycle, you can see where testosterone is higher. That's when, in general, we have more sex drives because testosterone is peaked at that time. And that's normally the day of ovulation. So like Mother Nature is saying, let's try to have sex during this time because that's the most fertile period of the month. And then the next part is when the ovary has now released the egg, which is ovulation. And then the ovary starts making progesterone. So the ovary is making these hormones and it's being signaled from the brain to say, make these hormones each month in this way so that we can get pregnant. So this is what normally happens in a menstrual cycle every month. Now, when we think about what happens in our 40s and 50s is our periods start getting more irregular. That's called perimenopause. And so when you look at the graph on the right, This is hormone levels over a woman's lifespan. In the reproductive years is when you're having regular menstrual cycles, they're pretty synchronous. The lines go up, the other lines are pretty in the same modality, right? The teenage years almost mimic what happens in perimenopause is because the hormones are now being somewhat irregular. We're not making it synchronous. We're not having that 28-day cycle of the estrogen peaking and all that happening. And you can see that estrogen is really more dominant during that time and progesterone is decreasing. And that has a lot of symptoms for women. And when they can get like hot flashes, night sweats, mood swings, irritability, and those are just physical symptoms that they're having. They can also have problems with cognition. They can start having more less sex drive because of fluctuating hormones. And a lot of times men will, as you know, will say, what's happening to my wife? And the women also say, what's happening to my body? Because I wasn't always this way and my body's changing now. And why is this happening?
We're getting older and we're going into the menopause stage. The body's natural function is to say, all right, we're finished having children. And now, this is really morbid, and now we're getting ready to die. So let's just switch all these hormones and cut them off.
And that's actually an interesting point because before the 1900s, we weren't supposed to live past 50. Okay. Evolutionarily, we weren't supposed to live that long. So when our ovaries stopped, we were done. That was what our lifespan was. Because of technology, antibiotics, surgery, all the different innovations, we now average lifespan for women is about 82 to 84 in the United States. And menopause is 51. So, so that's why, from my perspective, that we weren't supposed to really live this long. And that's what ovaries kind of shut down at that point.
Well, and so if we're living so much longer, and then obviously we'll get into the fix for the symptoms and all of this. Um, do you think technology is designed to really leverage all the way through our 80s and 90s?
If you think back evolutionarily, Darwin and the survival of the fittest type thing, yeah, the people who had diabetes, blindness, had certain conditions weren't going to make it, right? But now we have medicines, we have different things that allow even different ways to still have a good life, even quality life as we get older and older. And for women, what you're trying to really emphasize is that the hormones can have a huge impact on what's happening with their emotions and their relationships.
How do the imbalances affect women as they're going through perimenopause and menopause? What are the common symptoms that you see as you have patients come to you saying, "Hey, I'm just not feeling right"? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, that's exactly right. They come saying something's off. I don't feel myself. I'm gaining weight, my middle section. I can't lose weight. My sleep is all messed up. I don't feel like I'm really rested when I wake up. My brain has now gone to less focus. I don't have the same attention span. I don't have patience. So the irritability factor there, they have less patience. So they notice that maybe they're getting more irritable about things when before they wouldn't get set off on something. And now it's like one little thing. And they're like, yelling at their kids or yelling at their partner, just feeling off.
And I think the weight gain is really interesting because, as I know you're very healthy and you take care of yourself and fit, and that's a priority for me as well. It seems like seemingly we're not changing anything. We're still eating really well. And why is the body all of a sudden changing when I'm still going to my sessions with the trainer 4 days a week and I haven't changed my nutrition patterns? And all of a sudden, there's an extra 4 or 5 pounds. All of a sudden, there's an extra 6 or 7 pounds, and nothing's coming off.
Yeah, it's very frustrating, and it's frustrating for every woman, I think, and some women are not as impacted as others with regard to the hormonal changes, but that's something I hear a lot is they feel like their body's changing, they're gaining weight. No matter what they do, they look at food and they gain weight, right? They can't even eat the same amount they did before because now they're gaining weight. Some of that has to do with as we age, our metabolism slows down. So we can't eat the same calories and still maintain the same weight. But if we do the weight training, building more muscle mass, having more protein in our diets, there are different ways we can combat some of that weight gain. And then hormones therapy, which we'll talk about a lot later in the show, there's ways we can make the hormones more balanced, which also makes it easier to get better sleep, which then decreases cortisol and it makes your body be able to lose weight when it wasn't able to before.
Eh, that's such a, it's like a domino effect, really,
Yes,
is what it
absolutely.
sounds like. What it sounds like. So, have you seen women come to you who think maybe their marriages are failing? And tell me what that looks like to you, because I hear different things when folks come into me. My marriage is failing, right? You hear very different things through your lens, right? So, what do you hear, and how do you address that as a physician?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because it's if we could have divorce attorneys and OBGYNs work together like you're doing, we would help save a lot of marriages. But they sometimes don't see it as a marriage problem. They just see it as they're more upset at their husband. They don't want to have sex. Like they used to have a good sex drive. Now it's like the last thing they really care about. They're so tired and they're stressed out and they're not feeling themselves. So of course you wouldn't want to have sex when you're not feeling yourself. You feel like you're gaining weight. You feel ugly. You feel like, my husband's pissing me off too, right? Although they're more irritable because the hormones are impacted. And so it's kind of like, no, it's not anyone's real fault. It's just what's happening. And understanding that is what's key to like saying to both partners, hey, let's take a look at what's happening hormonally, because this might give awareness as to why there might be some relationship problems, especially certain parts of the month if a woman is still having her menstrual cycle.
And that's interesting too. And we'll talk about the tracking piece of this in a little bit. But I bet people don't realize that if they started to sit back and look at when in the relationship you start to have the most arguments, the most irritability with each other, the fit, right? It would be interesting to see, and I'll bet you would see that there's a rhythm that goes on there, right? There's a little pattern happening there. I got to tell you, from all that I've learned from you so far on this, I'm changing. And when I have couples come into me, they come into me for as a lawyer to represent one or the other, or they come in together to mediate with me. And in both scenarios, I always ask them, "Are we sure this is what we want to do? Have you made every effort to save the marriage?" Right? Because some people will rush into it without having given it more thought. But guess what I'm adding to this? Those questions are now, um, what efforts have you made? Not just asking, have you gone to marriage counseling, marriage therapy, obtained spiritual counseling, all of those kinds of things. But what have you done on the medical side beyond the psychology?
That's really brilliant. That's going with the legal aspect and the lawyer, because you're not just saying, I want your money. I'm going to just process your divorce. You're saying, let's see if there's a way we can salvage this relationship, because maybe there's just a discrepancy in basically how we're dealing with each other. Exactly right. During the perimenopause is also when your children are now becoming teenagers, which adds a whole other aspect, right? Because they have their hormonal fluctuations. My daughter's driving me crazy. She doesn't listen to me. My son's testosterone, he's just, he's off doing whatever. And then your husband is just kind of saying, well, honey, what's the problem? Why don't you want to have sex? I don't even want to be here because everyone wants my time and I'm out of control, right?
Yeah. Why would I want to have sex? Don't you see what's going on here?
Which is aren't done. The house is a mess. The kids aren't doing what I said, and you don't help me around the house. And
Right. And P.S. I feel like crap.
you can say I don't feel my best because I'm just not sleeping, and I'm not losing weight. I feel like I'm frustrated. Everything is, and I'm not saying that all women go to this severity, but there are a lot that come to me during that time that say, I don't know what's going on. I'm really feeling helpless. I go to the doctor, and the doctor says it's just normal. Your labs are normal. And the labs can be normal. It's because it's emotionally the roller coaster of the hormones are changing. So it's kind of like you have to go deeper than just say, oh, well, the basic labs say this. And that's where the tracking sheet really comes in, because it tells you like when are you feeling just those worst times. Like a lot of women can have PMS, premenstrual syndrome, especially 7 to 10 days before their cycle. So if she knows that and her partner knows that, maybe her partner might say, well, maybe I'll help around the house a little bit more. I'll try to minimize any kind of stressors that she might have. And that would be really a great relationship mending, because then she would say, oh, he's really helping. This is great. Right.
Right. Right.
Right.
Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world, but it just doesn't occur to us, especially
Right.
when we have a physician saying, "Well, the labs look fine,"
Yeah.
It would-
Yeah. and just deal with it. Just go home, have a glass of wine,
Right.
or put on an antidepressant, or, well, sex drive decreases over time and just deal with it. I mean, but there's so many things we can do. There's so much that we can make life much better as we
Yeah.
talked about, living to our 60s, 70s, 80s.
Right.
There's so much we can do to make that time so much better than what we
That's
were
right.
told.
And that's what I mean by the technology, the medical technology that's available. So, okay. Well, before we jump into that, let me throw some statistics at you. And let's talk about this for a second. There was a 2015 study by the American Sociological Association. And that study revealed that right now, about 69% of divorces, well, 2015, so 10 years ago, about 69% of divorces in the United States are initiated by women. I thought that was pretty interesting. So, to give you a further stat here, between 1990 and 2019, something really interesting changed. In 1990, 8.7% of all divorces in the United States occurred among adults who were 50 and older. By 2019, that percentage had grown to 36%. 36%. So we have an area in the law called the gray divorce. And that's referring to the older, which I would like to not be considered in that group. We should just say the blonde divorce. But anyway, the gray divorce is what it's called. And I will tell you that in 2020 and COVID on the law side, we saw an influx about 3 months into COVID of calls for divorces of folks 65 and older. And we actually had 3 active cases where both the husband and the wife were in their 80s seeking a divorce. Crazy, right? So,
Yeah.
so right now we've got 69% of the divorces in America are being initiated by women. And as of 2019, the percent of the adults over 50 going through a divorce has jumped from 8.7% to 36% or higher. So there's a lot of speculation going on in medical and science journals as I've read them. So don't hold me to it, Diana. You know better than I do.
But I think there's different reasons for this. And there's
Right.
probably, as we said, speculation as to why. I mean, COVID was something that was completely foreign to all of us, and that we had to be locked up, literally like sequestered in our houses. And when your husband's with you 24/7, a lot of women say, this is not what I wanted. He's supposed to go off to work. I can do my stuff, or I go to work and we can separate and then come back and
Right.
rejoin. The kids are home 24/7. And it's just like, okay, this is not what I signed up for.
You're spot on. That's exactly what we were hearing. And where a relationship was already weak and honestly, we had somewhere the husband and I can think of in several of these cases was already being unfaithful. And
Right.
now he's stuck in the same house and he's still trying to do a sneak around. I'm not going to say these were rocket scientists who are deciding to do these things. Anyway, so, but when I looked at the different reasons or speculations that were given of why have we had this huge jump in divorces of people at 50 and older? What I didn't see was any discussion of hormonal imbalance. Nowhere at all.
And that is a huge thing. Go back to that graph that I showed you. Women in their 40s in general are perimenopause, right? And that menopause is about average age in the United States, 50, 51. And those hormones are changing. And women in menopause, if they're not on any hormone replacement therapy, they're going to have a little more testosterone relative to what they used to have. So I think there's different reasons why women start potentially having more voice and then less tolerance also during that time. They worked their butts off doing what they're doing. And now the kids have gone to college. And that adds a whole nother level of now what do we do with each other? And that's where a lot of women also say, what do I want to do with my life at this point? So I don't want to start over, which I think is great, but I don't think a marriage needs to crumble because of hormones. And that's where I think this whole discussion is what's so important, because this element is a huge part of this, what's going on.
Yeah. Well, and we believe within the culture of our law practice and our mediation practice that divorce isn't something to be considered lightly. Marriage isn't something to throw away. unless it's inevitable, right? And it's just irreparably broken down. And so that's why we ask those questions. Are you sure? Right. And even when we do get people divorced, sometimes they reconcile, you know? And so that's good. But this is something that I think is another area, like I said before, that we really need to be considering and just making sure because it's such a life change, especially if you've had a long-term marriage.
And the other thing I wanted to bring up, which is another factor that I don't think that couples think that much about, but it has to do with the sex drive and what's happening with the vaginal tissue. So a woman, and as she goes through menopause and even perimenopause, she might have more pain with intercourse. She has vaginal dryness. And of course, when it hurts, no one really wants to have sex, right? Then the husband might say, well, let me look at other sources, or that whole aspect of our marriage is now gone. And then that can cause some infidelity, or it can be that just the sex life just goes away completely. And again, there's things to do to make that so much better. But you have to go to the right doctor and have a doctor that listens to you and then addresses the problem because it's not really a problem. It's just a part of life. And that we definitely help in that aspect with making things a lot better. The patient like talk about it that much, and some doctors don't want to address it because it opens up a can of worms, and they don't have time. They may have 7 to 10 minutes with that patient, and they just want to refill the prescriptions, go through the motion. The last thing they want to do is talk about your relationship because that's going to take way too long and they're not going to have the resources to deal with it. I always ask my patients about the relationship. Are they sexually active? Are they intimate? How is the relationship going? Are you just roommates? Because sometimes that's what happens. They're just passing in the dark, kind of like roommates or friends. It's sometimes the woman who has less sex drive, it's sometimes the man who has less sex drive. And then you have to say, okay, so how can we rectify it? And I do agree, not all divorces should be saved. That is, my parents got divorced and I believe they needed to be divorced. There's a whole another aspect that we need to look at that could be potentially causing some of the issues in the relationship.
This is kind of a funny question. I hadn't thought of it until now as you were talking about this, but with doctors being rushed because they're working within a system where they've just got too many things to do. But what happens at the medical school level? Now, I went to law school a long time ago. You probably went to medical school a long time ago. Has much of that changed in as far as the education of future physicians on getting them comfortable about talking about um, hormones and sex drive and the impact to the relationships as they're
Yeah.
practicing?
We get very few hours on menopause and what's happened with hormones. I mean, I think if you look at it like maybe 4 to 8 hours during how many years of medical school, the relationship and sexuality, I mean, it just kind of brushed aside. We don't get enough of that in medical school. Now, maybe that'll be changing as time goes on. But when I was in medical school, very little was on nutrition too. I mean, there's so
Yes.
many things, lifestyle and just basic things that were not discussed because so much emphasis was placed on other aspects of science.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I suspected because as a practicing vegan, I run into the nutrition piece quite frequently when speaking with treating physicians because it's just not even a consideration as much because there wasn't any education on it. It seems like physicians are really kind of left to self-educating at this point on nutrition, and it sounds like also on the hormone replacement therapy, libido, all of these things. Okay, so let's talk for a second about your book. So your wonderful book, wonderful book. I'm going to show it here. All right. So Healthy Sex Drive, Healthy You. Everyone should get this book. I will have the link to it in the show notes. You can get it on Amazon. Even if you don't go to the show notes, look up Dr. Diana Hoppe on Amazon and you can get this wonderful book. It's really written well, Diana. I love it because um, I could relate to your writing style in the sense that you and I could both write books very technical, right? I could sound just like a lawyer and you wouldn't know what the heck I just said, right? And same
Right.
thing on the clinical side. And what's so nice about this book is it's relatable, it's understandable. I don't feel like I went back to, chemistry class and
Right. I like physical chemistry, but not organic chemistry.
right. So anyway, so here's where you're really talking about libido as a health indicator, right? So it's a marker of a number of things. And so, can you talk a little bit about how what a good healthy libido is a marker of, what that indicates, and what low libido really means for us?
Yeah, well, part of the reason I wrote the book is I was doing clinical trials with a medication for decreased sex drive in women. It was a medication that now is available for premenopausal women. It's called Addyi, Addyi. Answer was the other name of it. But basically, I was interviewing women as to why they were having less sex drive, and because then they could get the medication. And it was very interesting to me to just see how many women had less drive and to be on the medication, they had to also have a good relationship, et cetera, but they just didn't want to have sex. But I saw ways that women would try to get out of having sex because they just didn't want it. They'd pretend they're on their period the whole time, right? So they put like tampon papers in the garbage in the bath.
Yeah.
So the husband thinks, oh, she must be on her cycle again. She's having irregular bleeding, or she might get up earlier and stuff. But it's very interesting. And that's what got me to write the book, because I was like, there's no books about women libido. It was like, they have books about how to have, amazing sex and the Kundalini, yoga or whatever, but
Yep.
there's no about basic sex drive. So that's what made me motivated to write the book. And then I saw that part of a healthy life is having a healthy libido. Now, libido doesn't mean having sex 5 times a day or something like that. It doesn't mean being crazy sexually like that. It means being intimate with your partner and it could be intercourse. It could also just be, because you got intimacy just by touching or kissing or hugging or things like that. And when you feel resentful to your partner or angry, or you don't feel good about your body. So there's a lot of parts that go into libido, like self-esteem, communication, stress. Oh my God, stress. Which one? And it's getting only worse as life just makes things crazier. But stress is definitely like the 24/7 that women are just like, the last thing I want to do is think about sex, because I can barely even take care of what I need to do in the household. Right. I mean, they're 24/7 trying to just juggle everything. And then they wonder why their sex drive went down. And the husband's like, well, you used to be like, we could do this, and she's like, I just don't really want it. Do something to help me. The hormones are fluctuating and the level is changing. And that the husbands don't know that because they're not in medical school. They don't have this education. And they're wondering, like, what happened to my wife? She used to be all fun and happy. And now she's kind of cranky and irritable.
Yeah. And so that really should be a big warning sign that something's just not right. In other words, I'm hearing you say, don't accept low sex drive as okay or normal, because it's not really how we were designed to be. Right?
And there are times when your sex drive will be higher. Okay. So when you look at the menstrual cycle, we talked about that graph, testosterone peaks around the same time that estrogen for ovulation occurs. So testosterone peaks at the same time. So Mother Nature kind of made it so, like, let's think about sex. Let's think about being intimate, because that's when it's released. So that would be a way to further our genes, right? So we can procreate so that we can continue our species, right? The second part of it is when progesterone's being made is kind of when your body's more chilled. Progesterone's more of a calming. And most women aren't thinking about sex in that period of time. But then you can also think about stresses in life. Let's say a parent is aging or dementia or something, some crisis occurs and stuff. I mean, there's a lot of things that can cause stress and put that into the relationship. And so for women, it's not like they really want to initiate sex. It's more like they'll do it and they'll get definitely aroused, but it's not like the forefront of their mind. Whereas men are a little different. Their testosterone levels are pretty much high their whole lives, and they start declining at age 30, 10% each decade, right? A man is more like a steamroller. He's got to go straight. It's rolling. We're going. It's all good. A woman is going to say, wait a minute, did I get the lunches for the kids? What about the soccer game? What about the thing I was at that meeting? What about this? And so sex isn't something that she's really even not involved with sometimes.
With a low libido. So we look at that as okay, warning, something's going on. Often it's all these hormones that are not doing what they're supposed to do, or that we're losing them. And, the imbalance, I guess.
On roller coaster during perimenopause, and then the lack of hormones with menopause. Right.
Right. Okay. So when we're in menopause, it's normal to think, okay, well, maybe it's just my hormones. But if there is a lack of libido, there are some medical problems beyond hormones, aren't there, that might signal?
Right. It could be a hypothyroidism, different things that could be potentially causing the lack of energy, the loss of spark for light, be depression. There's a lot of things that you have to evaluate when you look at someone not feeling right or not feeling themselves, right? You do have to look at, is there any imbalance, maybe minerals, vitamin D, vitamin B, what's happening with their chemistry, liver function, glucose levels. So it's not just the hormones, but the hormones are a big part. But then you have to look at, is there something else that might be driving this to be less?
Yeah.
To be age, our thyroid gets less functional. And so may have lower thyroid levels, which has caused less energy, also less drive, etc. It's a complex thing, but I think if you find someone who can take the time to work with you and also look at your relationship parts of what's going on, because if there's resentment, if there's some issues that still aren't being rectified because of anger from something in the past, that is something that women have a very strong memory about things, right?
Yes,
So
that's for sure.
sometimes we tend to like count and say, well, you didn't do this and you didn't do that and you didn't do that. And
Right.
then like, well, I don't even remember that. But why is that still even in the equation? Like I thought we passed that. So like marriage counseling, like you were talking about,
Yeah.
and just the couple kind of coming back together and saying, like, where are we now and how can we make this better?
Be sure to join us next time for part 2 of this great interview with Dr. Diana Hoppe.